Those back roads between New Mexico and Arizona can be scary. Tiny ramshackle houses in the middle of the desert that are like 50 miles from anything. I always did wonder what living in those situations was like. I mean, I used to live in New Mexico, and I drove around those roads a few times to get to South Utah. Never saw anything, but I know the Navajo Nation is definitely a special kind of unnerving sometimes. It's very beautiful, but it's so remote. And hands down, the stretch of road between Gallup and Flagstaff is the scariest place that I've ever been through. I'm very familiar with the Navajo REZ, with certain places, roads and such, but I'm not familiar with the remote isolated places up in the middle of nowhere. This story comes from the perspective of an old coworker named Cujo. He's from the Navajo Nation. That's not his real name. That's what we used to call him at work. We worked together when I was working in construction up in North New Mexico on a reservation. After working together, we became friends outside of work. One time we were together and he told me about a very creepy encounter that he had near his home, somewhere between New Mexico and Arizona. He didn't really specify where. I think he did it on purpose. It began one night after we had finished a 12-hour shift. He said that when he got home that night, him and his wife got into an argument. Upset, he left the house with a pack of beer and started driving around the roads near his home. After a few minutes of driving through the desert, he said he came across a road that led up towards the mountain. He said the road was so steep and tight that he was surprised he made it to the top without rolling off, and he knew getting back down would be even more difficult, but I guess he didn't care. He said that once he got to the top, he sat on the tailgate of his truck, drinking and trying to calm down. After some time, he began hearing strange noises in the distance, sounds unlike anything he had ever heard. Now, I do want to say that Cujo told us he knew about Skinwalkers, Deer Lady, the Hat Man, and all the other stories, and he had never experienced anything, which, if you know, he was breaking every single rule from the nation. He was familiar with coyotes, wild dogs, and other desert animals, but he said this noise was different. It sounded a bit far away at first, so he didn't think too much of it, but after his second or third beer, he heard the sounds again, closer this time. He told me that this was the moment that he started paying more attention, and he started to get a bit nervous. So he decided to get back into his truck, drink the rest of the beers inside, and listen to some music. A few minutes later, the noises returned, louder, almost like screams. Now he was scared, so he decided to fuck this idea of being up here, and he just sped off down a random dirt road. Since he heard the noises coming from the way that he had came, not knowing exactly where he was, he continued the path leading away from the mountain, but the screams sounded closer now. The dirt road twisted and split, and more than once he had to slow down because he said some points were sharp turns. Unsure which way led back towards the main road, he just kept driving, and every time that he stopped or slowed down, the sound seemed to catch up with him. After about a minute, he said his headlights picked up a shape ahead. He slowed down. Whatever this was standing in the middle of the road, but just a bit halfway, and as he got closer, he saw that it was an older guy. He was holding a shotgun, and Cujo thought, great, I'm about to be carjacked and most likely used as a living sacrifice or something. Cujo said that he could have driven past them, but the man wasn't really blocking the road. Nothing was stopping him from hitting the gas, but for some reason, he didn't feel the old man as a threat. He walked up to the car and Cujo said that he didn't lower his window. I can't remember how he said it, or what words he said, but he told me in Navajo, but I can't remember for the life of me. So basically it was a friendly greeting. Cujo then said that he lowered his window, and the old man told him, "You were parked up there." Cujo said that his stomach dropped. I know you were. We could see the light in the distance. Cujo told him that he was leaving, that he had just missed a turn back to the main road. The old man then shook his head slowly and said, "If you keep going that way, you won't make it down the mountain." Cujo said that he had driven even more dangerous roads, and the man cut him off. "You don't think if they wanted to, they would have already caught up to you?" That's when the noises sounded again. The man stepped aside and pointed towards a small trailer home set back from the road. "Come inside," he said, "at least for a while till the next hour passes." Cujo said that he didn't know how to feel about going into a stranger's home, but then he heard the noise again, and the old man said, "It's gonna be making its round here in just a bit. You're invited to my home, but we are going now." Cujo shut the engine off. When he looked towards it, he also saw a young boy holding a shotgun off to the side of the road. He chose to go inside, and to his surprise, inside the small home was an older woman and 3 young children, none older than 12, all holding rifles or shotguns. The man warned them that he wouldn't be safe alone and that he should stay the night. Cujo said that he had never met these people before, and he didn't have an idea about anybody living around here. He ended up sleeping in the living room. That night, the weird noises continued, following up with screams, footsteps, and something circling the small home outside. When the first light of morning appeared, Cujo thanked the family and left. He said they were kind people and that he was grateful for their help. After that experience, he never went out alone on the reservation at night, especially unarmed. This happened a few decades ago when I was younger, and I worked with Cujo for 3 years before he left for another job, and I haven't seen or spoken to him since, even though recently we became friends on Facebook. I'm not sure how he found me, but I believe his story and others that I heard from people who live on the reservation. And as far as I know, him and his wife are still together. I saw their picture on Facebook, so it's official. I forgot to mention that Cujo told me that he bought some stuff for the family that had helped them out, but whenever he went back up through there during daylight, he couldn't find their home or anything else. I'm not native, but I know they have their own beliefs about spirits and such, so I do wonder if that was the spirit of somebody helping him out in the mountain. All I know is that I'm not traveling through those roads on the reservation. Shit, not even at night. So don't travel through there at night, even if you're just passing through. This happened back when I was a college student. I was home on break in Maryland, and I ended up meeting with a few friends who were also into urban exploring like I was. One of them told me about a state park, saying there were some abandoned churches out there, along with some other interesting ruins. We made plans to go together, but those plans fell through when my friends had to do something else that day. I wasn't going to be home long enough to reschedule, and by the time that I realized they were leaving me, it was already late in the day. But still, I decided to go by myself. I arrived around 4 p.m. It was mid-November, so the sun was already sitting low in the sky. I parked the car and started hiking. The very first church was easy to find, a big white Protestant building right near the parking area. I spent some time looking around inside, climbing a little higher into the structure, and then continuing down the trail. As I kept going, I found more than my friend had mentioned. I came across a few things. An abandoned car down in the ditch. Further up, I found another old car, and just when I thought I reached the end of the road, I looked up and saw another church in the distance. This one was different, a much nicer ruin. It was a solid stone Catholic church. The name on it read St. Cosca Catholic Church. By now it was around 6 p.m. The valley wasn't getting direct sunlight anymore, but there was still enough light to see. When I got to the church, there was one guy there with his girlfriend. They were smoking weed. I made a lighthearted joke about them smoking at church. We all laughed, and then I just wandered off on my own to explore. I was taking my time looking at everything. Eventually, the couple left. I assumed they went home. After they were gone, I noticed a few stone blocks lying deeper into the woods. I walked over to check them out, assuming they were pieces of the old structure. When I got closer, I realized they had writing on them. I was standing in the cemetery. I tried reading the graves when I suddenly heard a voice coming from the woods behind me. "What did you find there?" At first, I thought it was the same guy I had just talked to earlier. Without looking up, I replied that I found the cemetery and that it was pretty cool. And when I finally looked up, I realized it wasn't him at all. This guy was dressed in black, a black hoodie with black sunglasses and everything. Even though it was getting dark, I raised an eyebrow at him. He was like, "Is that right? Do you mind if I come look at it?" I told him that I wasn't stopping him or anything. He just laughed. But something felt off. He then said it was kind of hard to get in there and asked if I could help him. I looked around, confused. The only thing I could think of were some thorn bushes nearby. So I figured maybe that's what he meant. I said sure, and I stood up. But when I looked again, there were no thorns blocking him. As a matter of fact, there was nothing in the way. He could have just walked right over to me without any trouble. I stepped back and kept staring at him, trying to figure out if I was going to get knifed by some crazy psycho. My friend always carry a gun when we explore, but I hadn't been here long enough to justify getting a concealed carry permit. I guess the guy found my reaction amusing. He laughed again, and then he asked if I was scared. I said yes. Fuck. Then I quickly corrected myself and said no. That made him laugh even more. He told me he wasn't trying to hurt me, and that I just needed to say that he could come in. That's when I noticed something strange. He kept shuffling his feet along a line on the ground. I followed it, and I realized they lined up perfectly with the boundary between the remaining cemetery fence posts. He couldn't cross it. By now it was dark enough that I turned on my phone's flashlight. He took off his sunglasses, and I wanted a better look at his face. And that's when I saw his eyes. They were all black. Then I noticed something much worse. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see straight through him. The woods behind him were visible through his body. I whispered to myself, "A spirit." I guess he heard me because he replied, "Kind of." I didn't like that answer at all. I sat down inside the cemetery boundary. I figured that as long as he couldn't enter, I was safe. The mood changed right away. He stopped laughing, and with a serious tone, he was like, "So you're not gonna let me in?" I told him no. He crossed his arms, stepped back from the boundary, and he shrugged. "Oh well, it's not like you're the only one." And he just faded away, right in front of me. At the same moment, a strong wind picked up, and a tree branch snapped and hit the ground about 20 feet from the cemetery border. I didn't go investigate. I stayed exactly where I was. I stayed inside the cemetery for another 2 hours, turning off my phone light to save battery. Finally, around 10:30 p.m., I decided to leave. I hadn't heard anything else, and my battery was getting low. I was on high alert the entire walk back, expecting to run into whatever that thing was again. My parents were already pissed off that I had been out that late, but I didn't really care. Looking back, it was a really strange encounter. I was scared when I saw his eyes, but I think I did the right thing. I believe him when he said he was interested in the cemetery. At that time though, That cemetery felt like the only safe place that I had. I also believe that if he really wanted to hurt me, he could have. It almost felt like he allowed me to leave. That church most likely gets many people every week to look at the building that is. And I think I was just one failed attempt among many. A tool that he hoped would let him cross the boundary. I'm not sure who or what he was, but I'm gonna go with an evil spirit. This whole thing was just very weird. My stepmom didn't like us too much, but she told my sister and I this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. It was basically my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, we're gonna call her Macy. She grew up as a kind of a privileged teen in the 70s, and her mom had moved her family over here to the States from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff, hiking, fishing, outdoors type of stuff. There's even a funny set of pictures of them camping. My stepmom has raccoon eyes, and she looks like she hates everything. Anyways, because of Lily, the two of them would do stuff together. One Sunday, they decided to go hiking some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lady parked in this big clearing with some makeshift parking spots, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space, but there were no other vehicles there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path because the lady fancied herself as something of a badass. They got to the top of the hill, and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out, and she was groaning until Lady was like, they would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started bitching again. Lady finally agreed to walking down the side of the road instead of going through the rough hiking trail. So there they are, looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road. And after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window, and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they wanted a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lady still says that the moment he greeted them, her internal alarm went off. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It should only be a 10-minute drive down to the car. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in, and the truck started rumbling. Lady always says that was the point it clicked. What a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat, and 4 boxes of saran wrap, half hanging out from underneath the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lady didn't want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After about 10 minutes, the woods didn't look clear. They hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lady asked how long he thought it would be, and he said he was taking a different way down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. By the way, the girls were 16 and 17, and Lady didn't want to press anymore. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like an outdoors guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She also noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something that could identify him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was young, strong looking, so they didn't ask anything else, and he didn't offer any information. and they just drove on. Several minutes after that, they got to a tiny shack, a log cabin looking place right there in the clearing of trees. There was an old stump where somebody had been chopping wood, and a huge axe stuck into the log. Liddy was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out and said, "I'll be right back. Don't get out." And he just disappeared into the house. Liddy tried talking to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Liddy started begging her, and she finally put her foot down, demanding that Macy exit the truck with her. So they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left two young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me. They started walking around, looking at it. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom was raised really strict, especially when it came to manners, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lady was pissed off at this point and followed her to yell some more. When they opened the driver's seat, they saw on the driver's side floor, half hidden underneath the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried red, brown stains covering the blade, and it was stuck to the floor underneath it. Lady lost her shit. My stepmom started getting hysterical, and that's when they decided that leaving was far their best option at this point, and they just booked it off the side of the property into the trees. They went through the trees for a little bit until Lady was fairly confident that they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lady felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they felt relief. But as they got closer, they saw it, the same truck. It was parked on the other side of the makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way. They couldn't see if anybody was in it, and of course Macy wanted to run for the car, but Liddy told her to hold on. She was able to calm my stepmom down, saying that she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, it's the 70s, no cell phones. There was no ranger station or anybody else around. The parking lot was big and empty, and it was also open, and who knows what could have happened if they had decided to just stroll across it. Thankfully, Lady convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and just waited for what seemed to be a few hours. When darkness started to fall, all the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom started getting anxious and started annoying Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning how they were going to run to the car when they heard a clunk across the twilight lit lot. They saw as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and that same guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for a few moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they ran to the car as fast as they could, jumped in, and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. They both made it home safe and never went around that area anymore. From what my ex-stepmom said, they didn't report anything. Don't ask me why. I'll never understand why people don't blow the whistle on stuff like this. Maybe it's a combination of them being young. Believe me, they've been hassled about it. By the way, Lady now lives in Switzerland, and Macy is kind of a drunk. I don't think them reporting or even going back is a priority to them. I know it sounded like I was taking jabs at my ex-stepmom, but I mean, she liked her own kid by her and my dad and her niece and nephew, but she and her whole family, they couldn't stand my sister and I. Maybe it was different times. The 70s were a time for serial killers, a combination of people being too trusting and others being all too willing to take advantage of it. The guy must have been pretty stupid. I know people respond in these situations differently. I know I would have most likely ran to the car as soon as I saw it. But can you imagine what if he kept the truck out of sight and was waiting for them in their own vehicle? Liddy ended up growing up to be a badass adult. She does stuff like hike mountains and stuff, but with her dogs now. Also, ex-stepmom. She did grow a brain at some point in her life and isn't ready to shelter as she was back then. And thanks to them, I always check my back seat before I get into my car now. These are my experiences with what I'm convinced were skinwalkers. I lived in northeast Arizona, about 5 miles south of the Navajo reservation in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the reservation, or the REZ, skinwalkers are a topic of conversation among the locals. We all take it very serious. My family had gone camping near Wiggins Crossings, just in case anyone is interested in the location. We had been there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area, as we had camped there 20 or so times before. Because of that, my parents let me wander alone into the woods. This was back in the early 90s, by the way. I had some G.I. Joes that I had been playing with in a nearby creek about 80 yards from our campsite. There were no other campers there with us. My mom ended up calling me back to camp for dinner, so I left the creek to go eat. I played around camp for a while, then I realized I had forgotten my toys back by the water. So I grabbed a flashlight and went back. I knew exactly where I had left them, and in no time I found them and picked them up. As I squatted down at the edge of the water to grab them, a sudden feeling of urgency, something I had never felt before, ran down my spine. I remember feeling frozen with fear, like the little boy in E.T. when the alien comes out of the field for the first time and he's trying to scream for his family. I looked up and pointed my flashlight across the creek, about 10 yards down, and I saw something. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was standing upright. Then I thought it might be a bear, but it was too skinny and didn't have enough shaggy hair. It moved behind a tree and then peered out slightly at me. I was too scared to move. I had just read a bit about Bigfoot. It wasn't really a big thing in my area, and for a long time, I thought maybe that's what it was. Eventually, I was able to gather my wits and scramble as fast as I could back to camp. I told my parents what I saw, but they kind of dismissed it as my imagination. After that, I stayed close to camp for the rest of the trip. About 2 years later, I was at home. We had 2 dogs, outside dogs who lived their entire lives in our backyard. One night, they went absolutely psycho, barking at something in the alley behind our house. They both started whimpering. I had my window cracked open, and one of the dogs suddenly jumped up, chewed through the window screen, forced its way into the house, and refused to go outside for a few days. This other time, when I was about 13, we used to play night games around town. There wasn't that much to do. We would walk around the neighborhood, acting suspicious on purpose, so that the police would come chase us. We would then run down alleyways and hop into random backyards to hide. At that time, it was very common to see somebody drunk in an alley, so it wasn't a big deal when we noticed a guy standing in the alley behind my house that night. As my 2 friends and I ran from a police car that was right behind us, we saw him plain as day, standing directly in our path. We ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide. We waited for the police to pass, then hopped back out. About 3 minutes later, We ran back the way that we had came. When we got to the spot where the drunk man had been, he was gone. However, in his place, at least around that area, there was a dog. At least we thought it was a dog, but it was actually a coyote watching us. We ran right past it. Anyone who knows coyotes knows that they bail long before you get that close, but this one didn't. It just sat there, watching us run by. We all freaked out and stayed inside for a month. My last experience happened when I was about 17. My brother had a girlfriend who lived in a small community south of Winslow called Starlight Pines. It was about 25 miles away. One day, we went to go visit her. About 15 miles out, we saw a guy just standing on the side of the road. That alone was odd. The REZ was north of town, and it was weird to see anybody on foot south of Winslow. It's just desert and forest for nearly 80 miles. The guy, however, looked normal enough. Flannel shirt, jeans. We got to our destination and hung out with my brother's girlfriend and her family well into the night before heading back home. We hopped into his truck, a Chevy S10, and we drove back the same way that we had came. In the exact same spot, we saw the same guy, still standing there. I remember thinking, that dude is crazy, standing out there all day and into the night. What's he even doing? As we drove past him, we suddenly heard a loud bang on the back of the truck. At first I thought we hit an animal, but I didn't feel anything that suggested that we had run something over. I turned around and looked out the back window. My brother started to slow down. He was thinking that something might be wrong with the truck. In the glow of the brake lights, I saw that same guy chasing us. We were going about 55 to 60 miles per hour, and he was on the fucking road, just a few feet behind us. I screamed at my brother not to stop and go. He did. Being a Chevy S10, it had a speed governor at around 80 miles per hour, and this guy was somehow keeping up. At this point, we were freaking out. After what felt like 2 endless miles, I looked back again, and he was gone. We ended up getting home, ran straight into the house, and told our parents everything. The next morning, I went outside and looked at my brother's truck, thinking about the night before. I wonder what the loud bang had been. While inspecting it, I found a handprint smeared in the dust, about 2/3 of the way across the tailgate, dragged towards the right tail light. Whether you believe me or not, that's up to you. These are my experiences with what I'm pretty sure were skinwalkers. This isn't a fictional story. I just want to see what people say. Maybe somebody will know something. My wife and I have been having a lot of paranormal activity after moving into a wooded area just outside of Pittsburgh. Our house is isolated from the neighborhood. That only makes the fear of something terrible happening even worse. I do want to point out that me and my wife are logical, rational thinkers who are educated to some degree. Not able to explain the events, we have turned to people online. All these things that I'm going to share with you happened while sober and within the past 2 years. There is a law, so just give us a chance and let us know what you might think about it. Incident 1. Animals dying in the wild is pretty common, but hearing the screams of struggle and pain, almost like if the animal is being tortured. I don't know if that is normal, but the sounds do sort of scare me. Incident 2. Walking in the woods joined by my wife and our kids, we stumble upon a small clearing in the trees. Under some leaves were the shoes of children. Shoes were worn out, as if they'd been here for a long time. Incident 3. Now this one is hard to believe. Trust me, I know. I was in denial. smoking a cigarette out of the second floor bathroom window. I was scrolling on my phone. I got that feeling like if somebody is staring at you. As I glanced away from my phone to look, out of the corner of my eye, a humanoid type being. I could focus on it. It bolted into the woods behind my house, the east side. Completely caught off guard and terrified. I didn't even watch it run into the woods. I looked straight ahead and acted like if I never saw it, like a deer in the headlights. This creature was not human. That's why I was so deeply terrified. It was tall, had shoulders and a head, no hair, and the color of skin I couldn't make out. It's weird. I couldn't process anything fast enough as I just stared straight ahead, frozen in fear. Hearing the strides this thing had was unexplainable, and the speed it had, going through the middle of the night in the woods, through fallen trees and torn bushes. I know it wasn't human. I'm not sure what it was. That's why we're here. A few months go by, and there's another incident. The same bathroom window where me and my wife smoke. Since we don't want to go outside at night, we opened the window, but it sounded like it was pouring down rain. Both of us were confused. There was no water falling from the sky. I walked downstairs to go outside, trying to understand what the fuck is going on. The garden hose is on, and the handle is pushed into the dirt, shooting water into the tree above, making a loud raining sound. Pretty fucking weird, as nobody had done that. Incident 5. Feeling like somebody was staring at us, only at night. In the daytime, the woods are normal and somewhat peacefully, but at night, everything just feels different. You just have that feeling that somebody is watching you. Incident 6. At this moment, we have become interested and are sitting by our window every night, trying to find explanations to what that humanoid thing was. We were in mid-conversation on a random subject when a loud crack came from the ground right above us. The noise was loud enough and close enough to make both of us jump. We locked the window and didn't go out at night. It sounded like either a bat or an axe hitting a tree. From the humanoid creature and this loud sound, we became actually afraid for our children, that we had them sleep in our room. Incident 7. As we were laying in our bed, my wife woke me up at 2 in the morning. She was freaking out that she smelled burning plastic and thought that something was on fire. We have a 2-story house, and we had our bedroom window cracked, and we looked outside because that's where the smell was coming from. And that's when we saw a little triangular shaped thing in the back of the house, deep in the woods. It was of orange lights and some sort of blue light orb next to it, and you could see shadows of people walking around this thing. Right away we thought it was some sort of cult. Scared as shit, we were about to call the police, but then the doubt set in. When we double checked the window, there was nothing else around. Incident 8. After all of this, we still have to stay active, so we went on a walk one evening with the children around. Noticing that the sun was going down, we went back home. Obviously there's something going on here. Who would even want to be outside? We then got to our gravel driveway, which is about 100 yards. Tall trees on one side, bushes and smaller trees on the other. As we walked about 15 feet onto the driveway, we noticed a few bats flying down left to right and right to left. We only seen up to this point a couple in our side yard, feeding off of bugs, I guess. I told my wife and kids to stay put, that I was gonna walk down the driveway first and see what was going on. They stayed behind me, and the further down that I got, the scarier it became. I underestimated the amount of bats, so I started running because I heard the kids start to panic. They began to line their flight path with my head. They would turn away about 5 feet from my face, maybe closer, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that this was fucking terrifying. As I'm running trying to avoid these fucking demons, I hear my wife screaming as she flies past me. My daughter, on the edge of tears, was panicking. And before everyone shits on this, I know bats are already not a threat to humans, despite rabies. That's why this shit is weird. I can't explain why or how all this happened. Incident 9. This is from the perspective of my wife. One Sunday, my husband's parents were over for dinner when he came to me and said, "My mom said that she saw a chubby girl with a black sundress come out of the woods. She then walked the tree line, then went further down." Without knowing the layout of the land, I know it's impossible to picture, but you get the idea. This lady came out of the north side, and then went back in through the northeast. Now the strange part of all this is that the north tree line of our property is rough terrain, steep hills, torn bushes, and loose soil. It would be hard to hike it, let alone in a sundress and not physically fit. Even though about 1.5 miles north through the woods, you do end up popping out right outside of a small town. See, rational thinking, but still, pretty strange with everything happening. Incident 10, and the last one. So far, if either one of us go to smoke at night, by the window in our bathroom, we always hear this sort of bell. Kinda sounds like one of those Chinese ceremonial dong symbols. Being skeptical, we thought it was wind chimes. And the bell sounds, they're coming from the southeast side of the property. I know everything sounds so crazy and so fucking weird. Like I said, aside from the humanoid thing, nothing really paranormal you can say. At this point, I'm not sure what's going on. All I know is that there's something in those woods. Maybe some sort of witchcraft. Like I said, my logical, rational mind doesn't let me. So what do y'all think? I know it's pretty overwhelming. All the weird things just keep happening. And to be honest, we're both afraid it could take a turn for the worse. Please have an open mind and give us your opinion on what's going on. Why is it that when someone on the REZ commits suicide, a family member or someone close to the person always says they saw some dark spirits or some shadows beforehand? I heard the same scenario every time it happens out here. Someone sees some dark shadows or demon-like figures before tragedy strikes. My father one time saw that dark shadow while hunting. He felt a dark and sinister presence along the road, a black shadow that left him just feeling strange. The next morning, he found his brother hanging from a tree. My dad has shared the story with many people, and he's also heard similar accounts. Many have experienced the same thing. Maybe it's a sign of mental illness, but I believe dark influences play a role. No one takes their own life without some kind of influence pushing them towards it. Now, have you ever come across a shadow being? Many people have, but they are often afraid to talk about it. If you are American, I dare you to ask any indigenous person about what a black shadow is. Chances are, they might not tell you. I think everyone will mention one thing though. They do exist. They follow drugs and alcohol. They can linger through generations, attaching themselves to someone and remaining there, passing from one person to the next. It's not that they're out looking for someone just taking a sip of alcohol, or someone who is just, quote unquote, experimenting lightly. I'm referring to the people who are using these things to drown out their pain and forget their lives. They follow this because they feed off of bad energy, and in the REZ, well, there's a lot of bad medicine, witchcraft, and bad energy scattered throughout. Of course, I'm not saying that the REZ is just full of this, but out here, there is a lot of that. You'll be surprised by the things that I've seen, and all the stories I heard about how drugs have infested the REZ. I have seen and experienced these things myself, and I have learned that the only way to get rid of this is through some heavy ceremonies to break their hold. I had many encounters with these shadows, with the shadow person, or shadow beings. Some people might call them demons or evil spirits. I'm not sure what they are, but I have gone to a ceremony where an elder has done a cleansing. But that was a while back. I want to share this with you. One of the things that the medicine man told me before the ceremony was to write down everything that I can remember about these things. Something about finding the root or understanding the origin. From all of my encounters, there is one that stands out, and it lingers in the back of my mind. Throughout my life, I have encountered many things that I can't explain, that I don't want to experience again. I'm not sure if it's an ongoing pattern in my life, or I just happen to be at the right place at the wrong time. Or maybe I'm just sensitive to what is happening around me. If I am sensitive, I must be extremely sensitive to these things. In 2005, I started volunteering at our local radio station here on the REZ. Back then, a friend of mine, he was a DJ. He asked me to come up and answer his phone calls for him while he was on the air in the evenings. I agreed to it and started answering the phone calls for him. It was a fun experience, talking to people on the phone who wanted to hear a song, or if they asked about the weather, or whatever else was happening at that moment. So it was a summer evening, on a Monday. I can't remember the exact day, but what happened that evening is something that I still remember like it happened last night. We were in Studio A, the main broadcast studio at that time. My friend was on the air doing his show, and I was beside him answering the phone as people called in. It was a summer evening. The sun was still out, but it was slowly going down. There was also no AC, so we left the front door and lobby door open so it could be somewhat cool in the radio station. The air conditioning was an on and off type of deal. Sometimes it worked, some other times it didn't. It wasn't working that night, so we were doing our best to try to cool off. It was around 7:30 when we decided to take a break. For him it was a smoke break. While he was queuing up the songs, I got up to use the bathroom. The bathroom is towards the back of the offices and lobby, but before the little kitchen area. I was walking towards the bathroom, and as I came around the corner, I saw something go by the window outside. It was a man wearing dark clothes, and what I thought was a hoodie. It was pulled over his head. I thought that was crazy considering the heat that we had during the day, but as it walked by, it slowly turned its head towards me. The hairs on the back of my neck and arms stood up, and this fear came over me. My first thought was, shit, not again. I looked at it as it stood by the window, and then it walked away from the window, and the fear was gone. My rational side took over, and I thought it was my friend playing a joke on me. I turned around and went back to the studio, and he was sitting there. He hadn't even left. I looked at him and then towards the front door. Something about the way I looked must have made him curious because he did ask me, "What is it?" I didn't know how to respond to him about what I just saw and felt, so I told him I just saw someone outside walking around the building. My friend got up, and we both went outside onto the deck. Part of me being at the station means doing random security checks around the building, and so we did one. We went around to the east side of the building and around to the back where the tower was at. I went to the west side of the building, and I waited for him to come around. He never came around, so I went back to the front of the building, and so we met up on the deck. He asked me what I saw, because the station sits on the side of a hill and the only place to hide is behind the station. I'm not sure how to explain it at first, so it took a while to tell him what I saw. I told him that when I went to the bathroom, I saw a dark hooded figure walk by, and then it stopped and looked in at me. I told him about how the hairs on my neck and arms went up when I saw it. He looked at me and gave me a look that made me think he didn't believe me. Then he said that things happened there from time to time. He has felt some things but never seen anything like what I told him. We said a prayer and went back inside. When we got back inside, he told me to let him know if I saw it again. I tried shaking off the fear that I had, but it wouldn't go away. It stayed with me. My friend and I went back to doing what we were doing. He got on the radio, and I answered the phones once again. It was after sundown, and it was still light outside when I felt it. The hair immediately went up again on the right side of my body, out of the corner of my eye. I could see it, standing there at the front door. The hood over its head was above the top of the door, and it was bending down to look at me. I could feel that. I turned in my chair to look at it, and as I did, it disappeared. But for some reason, I knew it was still there. I turned back towards my friend, and there it was again in the corner of my eye. I signaled him that it was back. I then said the following words to him silently. "It's at the front door." He was talking on the microphone, so all he could do was nod at me. He was doing a station ID, and that took about 2 minutes. I could still see it standing there in the doorway, but as I turned to look at my friend again, the hair went up on my arms and neck. I saw it walk in and stand by the inner door out of the corner of my eye. The lobby door is 20 feet away from where I was sitting at. I tapped on the table quickly. He looked at me. "It's at the lobby door," I mouthed to him. As I turned towards the lobby door, I expected it to disappear like it did before, but I could see it. A full body silhouette was standing at the lobby door. The black hood was over its eyes, but I could feel it staring at me. The first thing that came to my mind, I waved it, yelling in my head, "Get out." That made my friend jump as he was still reading the station ID. I looked at him quickly and turned back to the lobby door. As I did, the black shadow transformed into a wispy black cloud, and then it disappeared as it went towards the kitchen area. As I said, that was the longest, scariest, heart-pounding 2 minutes in my life. For the second time in my life, I had seen something like that. I was still looking towards the lobby area when I saw out of the corner of my eye that my friend was done, and he started up the music again. He gave me that "what the fuck" look. Then he asked, "What was that?" I told him that I didn't know. He went on to say that even though he was on the air, he couldn't see it, but he felt whatever it was. We both got up and went into the lobby. That intense feeling of something bad was still there. He asked me where it went. I told him it went towards the kitchen area. He looked at me, and without saying anything, we both went walking towards the kitchen. The feeling we had was going away fast, and when we got to the kitchen area, it was gone. My friend has moved on to other things in his life. As I write this, I am wondering if that's the reason why they moved the studio around a few months after that. Studio A back then faced the lobby, front door, and a side door leading to the transmitter. Studio A is now what used to be Studio B. It's a lot smaller and doesn't directly face the front door. I can still see out into the lobby, but not the front door. I still see things happen here and there. I sometimes hear things on my own, but I have never encountered that dark shadow since the ceremony was done. Also, just an FYI, I disagree with those stories and people that think that these dark things come only at night. I know for a fact that they don't. I've seen some other things here, but they aren't like what I saw that night. Even writing all of this makes me feel sort of weird. It actually makes the hair on my neck and arms stand up, and it puts a little fear in me. So I'll just end the story like this and not speak on this again. I do smudge and keep old medicine from the elders in my room, and I think this has truly helped me. Look for help if you ever do see a dark shadow, especially if it's a silhouette of a person. I'm using a burner account here, simply because I don't feel comfortable sharing it from my main account. I do want to share this experience that I had about 9 to 10 years ago. And the reason I'm sharing this is to see if anyone has a similar experience, or maybe an idea of what this could have been. Before I start, I have told the story to plenty of people, friends and family. I have told them about this whenever supernatural or scary stuff has come up in the conversation, but I have always left out the finer details on purpose. To be honest, I think I still have some trauma from it. I don't like going too much into detail about this, or reliving this experience again. Instead, I have only ever told this as a short story to get a reaction. It's most likely a coping mechanism. My girlfriend is the only person I have ever told the full story. And just to be clear, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything here. You can believe what you want, and I respect your opinion. But I'm also not going to argue or debate over something that I know to be true. This experience happened when I was wild camping on my own, in a forest. I live in England, by the way, near the Welsh border. This is something that I've done many times, and I still continue to do to this day. I think it was April or May 2013, or 2014. The weather was unseasonably good, and this was the second of 3 nights that I planned for my trip, even though it ended up being the last. The first night and second day had been great. I got a lovely long hike in, followed by lunch at the pub. I drove back to the area that I was staying in, and I was now back in my tent. I settled down for the night. I read a book and had some beers and went to sleep. It was around 11 p.m. at midnight. I was just in a state where you're semi-conscious, about to drift off but haven't quite just yet. I slowly became aware of this noise, somewhere outside the tent. It didn't sound that close, maybe like 50 feet. It sounded like a person, perfectly humming a tune. After listening for a couple of minutes, it was definitely somebody humming a tune. When I say perfectly, I mean just that. It sounded like a professional singer or something because it was perfectly in tune. No voice breaks or anything at all. I can't remember whether it sounded like a man or a woman. At this point I'm shitting myself because it's just incredibly creepy, like something from a horror film. I hadn't left my tent at this point, and the humming also hadn't gotten louder. It just stayed a distant background noise. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I couldn't just stay there forever. So I mustered up the courage to open my tent as slowly and quietly as I could to see if I could see anything or tell where the noise was coming from. Within 5 seconds of me poking my head out of the tent, the humming stopped. It didn't fade away or anything. It just stopped dead, as if someone had pressed pause on a recording. I'm still very on edge at this point, but at the time I assumed that's just what it is. Someone playing a prank on solo campers with an audio recording. I really couldn't think of any other explanation. Based on that assumption, I shouted something like, "You're not funny, fuck off." That made me feel a bit better because it felt like I had addressed the issue. I'm not sure why. It actually helped my nerves a bit at that time. I let that hang in the air for like 10 more seconds while my head is still poking out of the tent, and it stays quiet. I'm kinda satisfied by this point, so I began moving back in. As I'm reaching for the tent zipper though, the humming starts again. The same tune, but much louder, much closer, and from the completely opposite direction. My heart completely sinks because there is no way someone could have moved from the first source of the noise to the second without me seeing or hearing something. It was impossible. It was perfectly quiet in the woods too. Not even any breeze against the leaves. And yeah, it was dark, but I could still see short distances thanks to the moonlight. In the back of my mind though, my subconscious is working overtime, trying to rationalize this, and I assumed that there were a few pranksters out there with a few audio recordings. I can't exactly remember what my thought process was at this point, but for one reason or another, I got up out of the tent, turned towards the noise ready to scream at whoever it was. That's when I saw this humanoid figure, silhouetted against the tree line, maybe about 15 feet away from me. My best description of this is, it was large, a thin figure that was shaped like a human, but way too tall, and proportioned all wrong. It was huge, I guess over 7 feet. Its limbs were unnaturally long, like it had been stretched out. Its head appeared very small and rounded. I think the figure was gray in color, but I can't be 100% sure. I couldn't make out much of its face at all. It just seemed to be shrouded in shadow. I definitely didn't notice any features like eyes, mouth, or nose. It was standing quite still, facing directly at me. I did say quite still, because there was some movement, in the same way that a person or animal would sway back and forth, or make some minor body movements. If they were standing up, that is. This was a real, living thing. I know that for a fact. Not a prop or a prank. This thing was standing right in front of me, and it was aware of my presence. I'm literally paralyzed by fear at this point. I have never felt anything like it before or since. Just fear that has left me cold, shaking, just standing there quite literally unable to move. I remember thinking that I needed to get away, but I could not physically move my body. It was the most terrified I ever been. As I first laid eyes on this creature, the humming stopped and immediately it started humming again. But not a song. This is gonna sound crazy, but it started softly singing my name. Not only this, but in what sounded like my voice. That sounds fucking crazy, I know, but I swear, that's how I remember it. Even though it was singing in my voice, it still didn't sound right. The syllables were just off, as though a non-human heard speech once and was trying to copy it for the first time. This couldn't have gone on for more than 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. Me standing there, this creature standing, motionless, and singing my name. At some point, every cell in my body just switched, and I was able to turn and run as fast as I ever have in the opposite way. For maybe 2 minutes, I was literally running through the woods in just my socks and PJs, with absolutely no other thought in my mind other than putting distance between myself and that thing. I had no idea which way I was going, or how I would even make it back to my tent. When I eventually stopped, I just leaned against a tree. The forest was still completely silent. I must have stayed by that tree for about 2 hours, waiting for my heart rate to settle down, trying to calm down and decide what to do. I didn't want to go back to my tent. I was quite happy to leave all my stuff at this point, but I needed my phone and my car keys to get home. I was several miles away from anywhere. I eventually made my way back slowly. It wasn't too hard to navigate back to my tent in those woods, because the tree distribution wasn't very dense. I also realized I hadn't gone as far as I first feared. Once back at my tent, I grabbed just my phone and keys and went back to my car as fast as I was comfortable. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the backseat on my phone, shaking. I didn't even try to get any sleep. Once the sun was up, I was able to go back and pack my stuff up, and I left as quickly as I could. After that, I took a 2-year break from solo camping, something I normally do every 3 to 4 months. I suppose it didn't do anything towards me, given its size. I'm confident that if it wanted to harm me, it would have. So on that basis, maybe it was just curious. I did feel like I was in danger at that time, but most likely it was because of fear. The only thing that I have that has really confused me is how did it know my name? And the only explanation that I have is that maybe I was singing, or talking to myself, or talking on the phone, and I said my name. Who knows? Maybe it was stalking me. So that's my experience. Make of it what you will. But that has stayed with me ever since, and I know it always will. I'm not sure what was in the woods with me that night, but it has scared me, and it has transformed the way I think about supernatural experiences. If anyone has encountered anything similar to what I described, I would be interested to hear. Thanks for listening. Always respect the native land that you walk on. It holds so much history that you will never understand. Because of some backlash I've been getting, I'm not gonna name the place where this happened. As always, I'm not responsible for any nightmares, any scary feelings or dogs barking that might happen. This took place in the early 80s. Our tribe received a huge amount of money for housing, and a bunch of them were being built over the reservation. I remember a bunch of structures going up where no houses were at before. The only issue that we have with this is that it interrupts the natural order of things. A bunch of game trails were destroyed due to the need of housing. It was something that one family wasn't expecting, but learned that something shouldn't be disturbed. The house was just on the other side of the hill, just below the rise. The kitchen door faced to the east of it. It had a beautiful view of the sunrise in the morning, and it looked down into a valley. There is pine-covered draws on both sides of the house. The west side draws were just on the other side of the road, while the east side went down the hill to meet up with the other pine-covered hills. During construction, the local company that was hired to build it came across a few setbacks from the moment that they began construction of it. A basement was dug, and concrete was laid to form the basement walls. The crew arrived on a Monday to find that someone had thrown dirt into the basement. They assumed it was vandals with nothing better to do. They cleaned it up and started building the framework of the walls. By the weekend they had the floor over the basement completed, and at least 2 of the walls framed up. When they came back on Monday, the framed up walls were pulled down over the weekend. They put the framework back up and continued on with construction. Throughout construction, they ran into things like that. Eventually, the house was completed and the family moved in. Once the family moved in, that's when things started to happen. The family's dogs would start barking late at night, running around the house, or they would stay barking at something. The dogs would stop barking and move back to the side of the house that faced the road. At first, the husband would go outside with his oldest son and see what they were barking at. When they did, they would shine around with their flashlights in the direction of the barking dogs. A couple of times they would see some eyes shine down in the pine-filled draws about 100 yards from the house. The eye shine would disappear behind the trunks and they would hear something going down the hill. As time moved along, things began to change. On this day, the family decided to go into Rapid City, which is about an hour-and-a-half drive. The oldest son decided to stay home. It was a less than eventful day for him. He was regretting it. As soon as the sun went down and it got dark, everything changed. He was watching TV and the dogs began their nightly barking towards the east. He ignored it completely. The dogs continued to bark, but soon they began to sound scared. As they went towards the pine-covered draw, the dogs ran out from the front to the back like they always did. But this time, the dogs were barking like they were challenging something in the dark. The challenging barks went to scare barks. Then one dog could be heard yelping as it ran back to the front of the house, while the other dog kept barking, and then it gave a yelp, almost like someone had kicked it or hit it. It quit barking. Then there was a loud thump on the house. He heard the thump and went to the back of the house. He opened the kitchen door, called the dog's name. He could hear it whimpering, but he couldn't see it. That's when he saw movement in the dark. He closed the door and went to get his flashlight. He opened the door again, towards the drawer where he saw something move. In the beam of the flashlight, he saw a tall figure standing at the top of the drawer. It was 35 yards away from the kitchen door. The figure was dark, covering the light, and it lifted up its left arm, covering its eyes from the shine of the flashlight. He slammed the kitchen door, locked it, and backed up into the kitchen. Just then, there was a loud scream from behind the house. It was loud enough to vibrate through the kitchen wall. He ran out the kitchen into the living room, and there was another loud scream that seemed like it was at the kitchen door. He heard the dog that was in front of the house bark. Then he heard what sounded like the dog had been thrown towards the road. He heard it start yelping and running down the road away from the house. Just then, there was a loud thump like something had hit the south side of the house. Then, there was another bang. As he stood in the middle of the living room, the banging sounds continued all around the house, along with a low growl. He could hear it take a breath in between the growl. Every bang that happened, he would jump. It sounded like it was trying to knock a wall down. He remembered how they would come to see the progression of the house being built, and he remembered being told that the frame walls were being pushed down. The banging sounds continued for about 20 minutes along with the guttural growl. Then, there was a loud scream. Then it stopped. He stood there in the dark, listening. The last scream happened on the southeast corner of the house where his bedroom was. He stood there, hoping that it was over, and that it was gone. He walked quietly to his bedroom, stopping at every noise. He opened his bedroom door, looking carefully towards his window. His window blinds were closed, which made him feel safe. He walked around his bed and made his way to the window. When he got to the window, he wanted to look out, but at the same time he didn't want to. He stood there for a few minutes working up the courage to peek out the window. He opened the blinds just enough to look out. That's when he fought back a scream when he saw this creature 15 feet away from his window. It was looking towards the main road. He could see that it was at least 8 feet tall, mainly because the backyard clothesline pole was about 5.5 feet tall. Its waist was even with the top of the pole. Just then, he made a noise by bumping the blind, and this creature must have took notice of him, because it turned to look towards the window. It stared at him, and then it took off running back towards the draw towards the east of the house. Just as it got to the draw, it looked back towards his window. Behind it, he saw the pine trees light up with some car headlights. As he heard the car start honking, it disappeared down into the draw. He ran out of the house. Just as the parents parked their car, his mom had a scared look on her face as she asked if he was okay while his dad took off running behind the house. He just nodded, as he and his mom got his sleepy siblings out of the car and hustled them into the house. His dad came in and looked at his mom with a scared look on his face. He said that they're all gonna sleep on the living room floor tonight. She just nodded her head, made some beds on the floor. He loaded it and sat in the recliner. It was a sleepless night for him, his mom, and even for his dad. They fell asleep, but it didn't last very long. As the sun started to come up, his mom got up, picked up his siblings and moved them into his parents' bedroom. As soon as the door closed, his dad was asking what happened, and he told him everything. After he got done, his dad told him that both him and his mom had seen it in the headlights as they drove up. Then his dad went to the kitchen door and they both went outside. The sun was high enough to look around. As they walked around the house, in the dirt patches that were bare of grass, they found footprints that were about 14 inches long. As they came around the front of the house, they both heard some whimpering. They found their dog underneath the steps in the front porch. It was the one that you heard being thrown. They went around the house again as they did. They found dusty handprints on the side of the house. They both ended up walking towards the draw, but they didn't find any more footprints. As he was looking down into the draw, his father said, "Oh shit." He turned around to see that his father was looking at the roof of the house. There was the other dog. They got the ladder and climbed the roof of the house. Their dog was dead. The ribs were protruding from its side and looked like its neck had been broken as well. They both got the dog off the roof and laid it below the kitchen door. They called the police to report that their dog had been killed. When the officers arrived, they told them what happened. That's when the officers said that they don't handle that, and they called for a ranger to come to the house. A ranger got there. He just checked them out like they were crazy, but he said he would look around. He walked down the draw and came back up the draw about 20 minutes later. He told them he found tracks and he would take them down to see it. They followed him down to the prints. He went into a long story about bear tracks and he showed them the footprint that he found. As they walked back up the draw, he told them it was a random bear that had killed their dog. But everybody knew it wasn't a bear. But the way that the ranger was really pushing "it's a bear" line, they just ended up agreeing with him. The ranger just shook hands with them and left. In the years that followed, more houses were built in that area, and with them came more stories, phone calls and reports of loud noises at night, of some sort of coyotes or animals. All the families talked about this, but the rangers always offer the same explanation. But everybody knows it's not just a bear. This just shows you that some lands are not meant to be disturbed. Always respect it. I wanted to write about what happened to me and my partner in September of 2023. We were hanging with our two new friends, husband and wife. Let's say their names are John and Mary. They decided to camp at Todd Lake Recreation Center, which is in the George Washington National Forest, and they invited us to spend time at their campsite, have a few beers, relax by the campfire. My partner and I decided we weren't up for overnight camping, but we were down to hang out for a bit. The recreation center was only 45 minutes from home, so we thought we could drive it if we didn't have but a few drinks, ate food, and chill for a couple of hours. So we get there around 4:30 p.m. and we have camp snacks, chips and sandwiches, nothing too special. and some alcoholic drinks. We wandered down to the lake and let their dogs swim, and then we decided to head back to the campsite and start a fire. I knew we weren't staying the night, so I kept track of how many drinks I had and the food that I was eating to make sure I was suitable for the drive later. In total, I had 5 beers the entire night. Not to sound like an alcoholic or anything, but 5 beers do not explain what happened to us that night. I can handle my alcohol, and I am responsible when drinking by pacing myself, eating food, and drinking water in between each drink. So we were hanging by the fire with John and Mary, and next thing you know, John says, "Do you guys want to go walk down to the lake?" We respond with, "Let's do it." The campsite has a short walking path to the lake, about 0.5 miles away. It should only take minutes to get there. Now, this is when it gets weird. I look at my cell phone and see it's about 8:30 p.m. and I decided to put my phone in the car before we walk down to the lake, simply because I don't want to lose it. The next thing I know, I woke up in the woods in the middle of nowhere, passed out on the ground, on a trail, with my partner in the middle of this forest, an hour away from the campsite, and John and Mary are nowhere to be found. My partner was on his back with his head turned to the side, and I was lying halfway on the moss, and the other half on him with my head turned to the side, almost as if we were placed perfectly. We were lost, and both felt extremely confused and sick. We both ended up throwing up. We walked out trying to find John and Mary's campsite. It took us about an hour to get back, and it appeared we had hiked about an hour outside of the rec center. We both had zero recollection of how we got there, while we both passed out in the middle of the woods at night, and why the hell 5 beers with food, with many hour spans in between, made us so sick and lose memory at the same time. My partner was completely confused and started screaming for help. I was begging him to be quiet, because I felt so sick and had no idea where we were. I needed a moment to collect myself, trying to figure things out, and hike out of here, out of our current situation. Now, something to know about us is that we're both hikers and backpackers and very comfortable outdoors in nature. However, at that moment, I was so thankful that I didn't wake up in the woods at night on a trail alone. Thankfully, he was with me. During this whole time, we both felt like we were being watched as we tried to find our way back. It was eerie. I was telling my partner when we were trying to find our way back to the campsite that something felt very wrong, and when we got back, we needed to get in the car and leave. I knew something was up, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what happened. We were also both in shock how we both blacked out. Now, I know what you're thinking. We were drugged. We felt that too. But why would John and Mary, our friends, drug us? And why would they drug us and carry us deep into the forest? It didn't add up. We finally made it back to the campsite, and I first opened my car and grabbed my phone to see what time it is. It was 2 a.m. My heart sank. How did it go from 8:30 p.m. when we were walking down to the lake, which is about half a mile or less from their campsite, all the way to 2:30 in the morning? Both of us didn't like not knowing what happened to us in the lost time. So before we decided to leave, my partner knocked on their tent and said, "Hey John, we're leaving. We need to get out of here, something's off." John then replies, "Where is Mary?" And my partner and I both look at each other concerned and tell John, "What do you mean? She's not in the tent with you?" John then replies, "No, I thought she was with you two." That's when we all decided to go look for Mary. John said the last thing he remembered was we were hanging out by the fire and asked if we wanted to go down to the lake. And then hours later, he woke up underneath the picnic table at the campsite, not remembering how he got there. However, something seemed fishy, and he seemed like he wasn't concerned, almost relaxed. We found Mary down the trail to the lake, slumped over, asleep in the woods near the campsite. None of us remember what happened and why we all ended up in these places. It was misty, dark, and foggy on the mountain, and I was shivering, feeling sick, and just ready to go home. We got in the car and returned to our house, but it took a while to settle enough to sleep. When we spoke to John the next morning, he laughed it off and said, "Yeah, maybe we shouldn't drink so much next time we hang out." I remember all of us hanging by the fire, and then talking about going down to the lake, but I stayed back to deal with the dog, and you three went down there. And John switched this story from what he said the night before. Something didn't sit right with me. The Tall Lake Recreation Center was almost empty. We only saw one other family camping that night, and they were nowhere near our campsite, which was also strange. My partner and I don't feel like we drink enough to the point where it would cause us to black out, especially at the same time. So what did happen? But our only thoughts were this must have been something paranormal, or did they actually drug us? I started to get flashbacks of memory, and all I remember was John's face on the beach and then blackness. Was it something from the Appalachian folklore, like the Mothman, or some other bizarre creature? Did we all drink too much? Did we get drugged? My partner lost his phone that night, so I called the ranger the following Monday, and they said they found it in the woods busted up between campsites 5 and 6. But John and Mary were camping at campsite 1. The ranger did end up mailing it back to us. The phone never cut back on, even though the front of the screen was perfectly intact. It was only the back of the phone that was busted. A part of me doesn't want to know what's on that iPhone. The next day, my partner was starting to feel very ill, and I was starting to shiver and get chill bumps all day. We should have just gone to the hospital, but we didn't. I never experienced anything like this, and to this day, we are skeptical about meeting new friends or having new people enter our life. Either way, we're both so grateful that we made it home safe, and that we still have each other. My partner doesn't have social media, but I blocked John and Mary online, and we haven't seen them since then. We did move to another state in 2024, not because of this reason, but because I started dealing with a lot of mental struggles and night terrors since this occurred. And now I worry if it was John, or both of them. Are they doing this to other people? Thanks for listening. My wife, a native Navajo, invited me to go with her to her grandmother's house for Christmas. This being the first time I ever been to the Navajo REZ, I wasn't sure what to expect. I have ideas about what it might be like. Nevertheless, I was excited to go somewhere I'd never been before. Most of my excitement came from wanting to learn more about the other culture and the unique opportunity of visiting the REZ as an outsider. Because of this, I was also a bit nervous. What if I wasn't accepted? Would the people be welcoming, or would they feel a certain way about my presence? So we left our house on Christmas Eve with our dog, and we started to make the 4-hour journey to Grandma's house. On the way there, we saw a beautiful sunset scatter across the mountains. After traveling for about 3 hours, we found ourselves at the point that leads to an hour-long drive on an isolated road that would eventually take us to our destination. While we were on this road, my wife shared stories of dances and the practices that her tribe has. All of it fascinated me, and it actually left me asking more questions than I had imagined asking. By the time we arrived at Grandma's house, it was dark and cold outside. As I began to unpack the car, my wife took our dog a bit away from the house so it could go use the bathroom. By the time she got back, I had taken our bags inside and locked the car up for the night. As we sat around the kitchen table eating food that was cooked by Grandma, we shared stories and played a card game. After about an hour, we all said goodnight to one another and got ready to go to bed. At around midnight, my wife and I laid down, and I called out to the dog to go to bed. A short time thereafter, we fell asleep. I forgot to turn off the light next to the bed on the nightstand. And around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up having to use the bathroom.
That's when I noticed that our dog was just sitting, looking at the door that led out to a small hallway. On the other side was the main door to the house. I called for her to come back to bed, and she just put her nose at the base of the bedroom door, sniffing while scratching, so I assumed that she also had to go outside. I walked up to the main house door and opened it, ushering her to go outside. She ended up just sitting there and staring, after trying to get her to go outside a few times, and her not wanting to go. I closed the door and made my way to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. In the kitchen, there is a big window to the right of the sink that overlooks the driveway to the house, with a bit of light that makes the driveway barely visible at night. As I put my hand to turn on the faucet, my head turned to the right to look outside, and that's when I saw it. A dog sitting outside and staring into the house. But there was something strange about this dog. It was much bigger than a typical large breed by 2 times. I began to get the chills and internally said to myself, fuck this. Grabbing my water and about to head back to bed, that's when I saw that the dog stood up and began to walk away. One thing that I feel I might not convey well enough is the way this dog walked. It seemed to walk very awkward and almost stiff-like. I mean, what the fuck? What kind of dog even walks like that? First of all, dogs don't even really walk. After making my way to bed, I couldn't help it, but I was just thinking about that dog. As I laid in bed in silence, I began to hear faint, weird noises coming from the darkness beyond the bedroom window. I eventually fell asleep and woke up the next morning. As I sat in the kitchen table, eating the breakfast that Grandma had gotten ready for us, I couldn't shake off the feeling of that strange encounter with the dog. Trying not to sound too alarmed, I simply asked if the neighbors had a large dog. But this question itself seemed to trigger a series of reactions from both Grandma and my wife. She gave a worried look to my wife, and they both exchanged glances. And without wasting much time, Grandma quickly stepped out of the kitchen and grabbed the old phone and began making phone calls to people that I assumed were members of their community. There was urgency in her voice, and I could sense that something was going on. I didn't even say anything else no more, and they didn't say anything about it either. Soon after breakfast, a native priest and a medicine man arrived at the house. They also entered with some urgency and quickly began talking with Grandma in whispering tones. My wife then joined my grandma in the conversation, and they all began to look at me and talk more. Then, the priest went around the house with sage, and the medicine man comes to talk with me and Grandma about my experience. I can see the priest draped in traditional clothing, retrieving more bundles of sage from a pouch, and also going outside around the house itself. To sum it up, I had encountered something. It was a presence, and me, being an outsider, had somehow drawn its attention. My wife then said that she would be back, and she eventually returned with a bundle of raw meat. It seemed that this raw meat was an offering, part of a ceremony to ward off this thing that I had encountered. At that moment, there was a ceremony held. I won't go too much into details because it's simply too much. But basically, I encountered something that I shouldn't have the previous night. Nothing else happened after that. But now, whenever we visit Grandma's house, I have learned to abide by the unspoken rules that have been shared with me over the years. And so I'm telling you all this story so you all can be careful if you ever go to the REZ. Abide by these rules even if you're not in the REZ. I refrain from getting up to go to the bathroom at night. And if by chance any of us happen to witness something strange, that we should quickly speak up, not letting it linger in silence. And most of all, don't talk about these experiences with other people, as you never know Who is listening? The town I grew up in was a nice place to live. We had everything any normal town had. Fast food joints, the movies, supermarkets, and we even had 2 different shopping malls. You might think that 2 malls would be a bit too much for a small town, and you would be correct. The reason our town had 2 was that the original one was getting ready to close, while the new one had just been constructed. Everyone I talked to, all my friends and family, myself included, all loved them, while we didn't enjoy the huge amounts of people who would gather inside the shops. The mall would bring out a sense of wonder in all of us. The new mall had just been built earlier this year. It was massive. It had department stores that seemed to go on forever. The food court had almost 30 different restaurants. It even came complete with the movies and ice skating rink. Though the place was very cool, it was often bombarded by people from the neighboring towns and cities, congesting it beyond capacity. Taking a walk through that mall was like trying to walk in the ocean underwater with ankle weights. It got to the point where I would prefer going to the smaller, older mall, which happened to be closer to my house. The older mall was constructed in the early 90s. It also had the movies, but it was a fraction of the size of the larger one. Actually, at this point in the mall's life, the only reason to go to this mall was the small arcade and to the movies. It often amused me to think that the large building was just that, a building for an arcade with a few game cabinets and the movies with only 8 rooms or so. Malls are great, but you'll never catch me inside one after the sun goes down. It was a midwinter's day when a couple of my friends asked me if I wanted to hang out. Me, being the outgoing kind of guy that I am, I agreed. After meeting up with the 3 of them, they asked me if we wanted to hang out for a bit, then catch a movie at the old mall. I nodded, and we spent all day chilling, since school had been out for a winter vacation. At around 5 p.m., we all made our way to the mall. The walking sucked, but since all of our parents worked, and we didn't have cars of our own yet, it was really our only option. As we walked and our feet went through the slurry of mud and ice, we joked and threw snowballs at one another the entire way there. We didn't arrive at the mall until 6:30 p.m., which wasn't an issue, since our movie didn't start until 10 p.m. Walking inside the mall was like stepping inside of a rotting animal. Darkened shops littered the marble walkways. Only a few of them had their lights on, but it seemed like no one was around to maintain them. The further we walked, I noticed that they had built a sort of drywall type barrier to close off sections of the mall. Even though the sun was still out and it was setting fast, the closed sections of the mall were as black as night. The arcade itself wasn't impressive by any means, but it was nice to have something to do while we waited for our movie to start. All of us spent some time at the front row of cabinets and located games to play. I was finishing up a rather lengthy game when my friend tapped me on the shoulder, informing me about the movie. I looked down at my watch and was stunned to see that 3 hours had passed. Time truly does fly when you're mindlessly staring at a video game. So we made our way up the escalators towards the top level of the mall, where the movie theater was, and purchased our tickets. The movie was just some B-rated PG-13 horror flick, but one of our group was adamant about seeing it. When we entered the room, I wasn't surprised by how empty it was. Not only was it 10 p.m. at night, but the mall itself was pretty empty anyways. The only people we had seen while we were there was a guy behind the popcorn stand, and some guy who sat in the back of the arcade, staring at a computer screen. The movie ended up lasting around 2 hours, and we weren't exiting the cinema until a little past midnight. I'm not sure why, but stepping from the theater room into the lobby was surreal. It was like I was in a place that I shouldn't be. The lobby lights were dim, and the concession stand was completely dark. One of my friends joked about going behind the counter and swiping some candy for the road, but I guess he felt guilty and he just continued walking along with us. Standing at the top of the escalators, we had a view of the entire mall. The previously illuminated shops were all dark now, and that once pitch-black closed-off area seemed almost like an endless void. At this point, the only sound we heard as we stood there was the clattering of the escalators as it cycled slowly. Once we were on the ground floor, we took a moment to scan around us, noting how we were most likely the only souls in the entire mall, as another one of our group suggested we go take a look around. At first, I didn't want to get in trouble, but I was eventually convinced into going along with words like, they'll just tell us to leave, and we can just say we got lost if they find us. We walked over towards one of the sections of drywall that was put up to separate the remaining shops from the closed down area. With a slight bit of effort, we managed to slide a section out of the way for us to step through. Stepping onto the other side of the wall was a strange feeling. Earlier, when I felt like I shouldn't be there, this felt even more like danger to me, as if I went from standing on a cliff to walking on a tightrope. We began our walk through the abandoned part of the mall, two of my friends using their phones as flashlights. The only sounds we could hear were the clattering of the escalators growing ever distant, and our numerous footfalls as we pushed our way further into the darkness. We took note of the shops that had been completely gutted. Shelves and debris were scattered in and out of the shop fronts. Dismembered mannequin parts were all over the floor, both inside of the stores and outside. One of my friends picked up a mannequin hand and high-fived it before sending it flying further into the dark ahead of us. The sound it made echoed across the walls before quietly fading away. We all laughed to one another before a new sound forced us to stop. It sounded like the cracking of gravel or glass being stepped on. It was such a unique and distinct sound that we all froze in place, listening for a moment. Suddenly, a clatter sounded at my feet, and we all yelped. For a second, my friend directed his phone's light towards the sound, and I stared in shock. It was the mannequin hand that he had just thrown out. Only the wrist of the hand looked cracked and warped, as if something had squeezed it before throwing it. My friend shined his light on me, but I was too busy staring at something else. It was my other friend's phone, sitting on the ground with a light shining directly upwards. I walked over to it and gently picked it up. When I did, I flashed it around me. The light danced on the dark before I saw something that almost made me vomit. It was my friend, but he was standing as stiff as a board. He wasn't facing me, but instead was looking up at something. I shifted the light slightly, and I saw something impossible. Whatever it was, it towered above my friend easily over 6 feet tall. Its face was twisted. I couldn't really make out its features, but with the number of teeth I saw, I didn't really want to. Its torso was short, but its limbs were like a spider's. Its legs were long and narrow. Its arms were dangling at its side. It didn't seem to be wearing any clothes, but instead had gray skin, with patches of black all over its body. I could feel my own body begin to seize when I saw the creature raise up a hand and rested it upon my friend's shoulders in front of him. He didn't even move as the creature touched him. He just stood there, silently. Just then, another one of my friends grabbed me by my shoulder, and I spun around in panic, almost knocking him down and dropping the phone. He told me we needed to leave right now. As I scrambled to pick the phone back up, when I turned, I flashed the light back on the spot from before, but my friend and the creature had vanished. In a panic, we all ran out of there as fast as we could. The entire trek home, we talked about what we had seen and what we thought happened to our friend. One of my friends said that he had only seen him standing there. The other one said that he could only see me in the dark holding the flashlight. And then I told him what I had seen, and if they had not been there, they most likely wouldn't have believed me. We all debated on what we should do, if we should tell our parents, or just pretend like it never happened. They were both in favor of acting like it never happened, but I couldn't just let one of my friends get hurt and not do anything about it. So about an hour after we got home, I made my way over to my friend's house, the one who was left behind. I knocked on his door, and his mom answered. I told her that I really needed to tell her something important, but just before I could find any word, I saw him, my friend, sitting at their dinner table, staring at the ground. I then asked if I could talk to him, but she said that he had only gotten home a few minutes ago and that he wasn't feeling very well. I returned his phone while I was standing there, and then I went home. I haven't talked to or even seen my friend over the next 2 weeks when suddenly I was passing by and there was a for sale sign in their front yard and also a sold sticker plastered across the sign itself. I'm not sure what happened with my friend or why his family moved. I'm not sure who or what that creature was, but I don't think I will ever go to a mall after dark again, and I would advise you all to do the same. Going on a hike can be very therapeutic, and it's also a great exercise. At least that's what my ex-girlfriend said when she first took me hiking. It started out as just some way for us to stay in shape and spend some time together. The first time we went, I was a skeptic. I'm no stranger to exercise, but climbing up a mountain wasn't something I would consider relaxing. I remember wheezing and struggling the entire trek up the mountain. I wanted nothing more than to just go home and just lay on the couch with a bag of chips. Once we had reached the summit, I'll tell you, there are only a very few sites that can match it. During our relationship, she and I would go hiking about twice a month. We always went to the same exact spot and hiked up the same exact trail. After a few months had passed, I was no longer wheezing and was able to truly appreciate the beauty of it. I actually never really knew how incredible nature actually was. After some time, our relationship started to go downhill. We had grown apart, and it seemed like every time we speak to one another, it would end up in a screaming match. Eventually, it became one fight too many, and we ended up breaking up. I'll be honest, it was rough for me those first couple of weeks. The realization didn't fully hit me until I was stepping out of my car and onto that dirt trail. It had become such a habit that I didn't even realize I was alone. Since I had already made the drive up to the mountain, I figured that I might as well go. The first hike, doing it alone, was heartbreaking. But surprisingly, she was right. It did end up being quite therapeutic for me. Making it all the way to the top on my own, I felt empowered and decided that I wanted to continue hiking regardless. So for the last 2 years, I gone hiking twice a month, on the same trail, on the same mountain. I did, however, change the days that I would go, just in case she still continued to hike up there as well. I didn't want to deal with the awkwardness of seeing her on the trail. However, yesterday was the last time I'll ever go hiking in my life. The day started out as any other. I woke up, got ready, grabbed my pack, and drove up to the mountain. It had been raining all week prior, so I made sure to bring along a sturdy pair of boots, just in case, you know. When I arrived, I stared at the swinging sign on a metal chain. It read, "Rock slide. The trail is closed." I huffed and got back into my car. I thought about going home, and in hindsight, I should have done just that. But instead, I was adamant about maintaining my routine. I drove around to the other side of the mountain, which didn't take me very long. It wasn't that big of a mountain. I found a spot that appeared to be a clearing of some kind. It looked like an area for hikers to disembark and make their way up the mountain. As I pulled up, I saw a dirt trail leading through the trees, even though it was much more overgrown than the other path. I looked around and saw that this one had no sign, so I figured that the rock slide happened on the other side of the mountain. I grinned, inhaled deeply, and began my hike. This path was much more difficult than the other. It took me nearly twice as long to make it halfway up than it did on the other path. I ducked under branches, pushed between trees, and climbed over boulders. I was beginning to wonder if this was actually worth it when suddenly, I stepped out into a clearing. It seemed like a little pocket of nature safely preserved by the towering trees around it. There was a small stream lined with flowers running through it, with some deer scampering off in the distance. I felt some renewed energy pour into me as I continued onward. After 2 more hours of walking, I finally broke through the foliage and arrived at the top. As I stood up there, catching my air for a few moments, I looked around and enjoyed the view. I had never been on this side of the mountain before, so I wondered if I could see anything different. It didn't take me very long to notice a small cabin about halfway down the mountain, not too far from where I hiked actually. I wonder who could be living isolated up here on the mountain. As I stared at it from high above, I thought I saw something move in the trees near it. I stared a few moments longer to see if I could see it again, but there was no more movement. Then, a group of birds flew out from the surrounding trees, and I thought that must have been what I had seen earlier, just a bird. However, my curiosity wasn't fully satisfied, so I decided that upon my descent, I would try to pass by that cabin. Getting to it was much more difficult than heading back down the way I came. It was almost like the trees were blocking my attempts to get any closer. After nearly an hour of pushing my way through the brush that was in the way, I stepped out into where the cabin rested. The very first thing I noticed about it was that it appeared to be abandoned. The windows seemed to have been shattered long ago. The wood was slowly rotting away in places. The wooden front door seemed to sway and knock off the door frame, almost like a wind chime. This was obviously some hunter's cabin from long ago that had been neglected for many years. The sun was nearly behind the mountain as I stepped onto the wooden steps, my heavy boots making the wood below my feet creak painfully despite its age. I admired the carefully carved wood as I walked up to the door. I reached down and gently pulled the door open. It only let out a soft squeak of the hinge before opening fully. I peered inside, and even though it was starting to become dark outside, I could still see the interior clearly. The door opened up into a living area with racks and shelves and a small couch. I walked inside, taking care not to step on any rotting wood. To my left was the door that seemed to open to a small washroom and kitchen area, with just a passing glance that appeared to be empty. I walked down the short hallway, and there were 2 doors, both on my left and right. I opened the one on my right first. It was a bedroom. The bed had long since been overtaken by fungus and random plant life. I backed out of the room and pushed open the door on my left. I walked inside, and nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary. That was, until I saw something peeking out from behind the desk. It looked like a boot. Making my way around it, my pace slowly came to a stop. I think I had found the owner of the cabin. It was a man, or at least I think it was due to the clothing, because the skeleton still made it difficult to tell. The clothes seemed to have been torn up, most likely due to wild animals. I wonder if the person had a heart attack or some sort of accident. I then thought about how terrible it must have been to have died up here all alone. Just then, I heard a noise that sounded like the front door swinging shut. I felt my body freeze in place. I waited and listened for a minute or two. After not hearing anything, I thought it must have just been the wind blowing the door shut. I started to hear the floor creak. Somebody was in the cabin with me. I quietly backed up behind where the sturdy door opened up and pressed my back flat against it. A voice, like a ragged whisper, drifted down the hall. Hello. It sounded like an old man. I'm not sure why, but I stayed quiet and waited. Another voice, but this time it was loud. Who's out there? When I heard them say this, it sounded strange. It didn't seem like the correct way to ask if someone was inside the cabin. Just as I had this thought, the door on my left began to move slightly. It opened up, but I was still behind it, so the door just gently rested against me. I could still see around the frame, however, and whatever had opened the door was crawling on the ground. My eyes grew wide with each passing second. Its gray skin and disformed figure were unlike anything I had seen before. Long fingers with sharp nails quietly pressed into the wood in front of it. Disjointed feet pushed the rest of the body along. I remember thinking it sort of looked like that creature from The Lord of the Rings, or maybe a hairless dog. It crawled around slowly before climbing up onto the desk in the room and looked down at the skeleton. Then, that same voice sounded. Who's out there? I realized at that moment that the voice was coming from this thing. Just then, my body weight shifted and the floor beneath my feet, and the wood creaked. This thing snapped its head to me, its face with two gray eyes and a mouth like a cavern of teeth below. Then, it reared back and unleashed a deafening shriek at me. I quickly swung around the door, slamming it shut behind me. I dashed out of the cabin, nearly falling onto my face off the porch. My quick breathing was doing nothing to calm my panicked state as I forced my way through the trees and over the rocks. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I just knew it was down the mountain. My lungs were starting to sting in my chest, but I kept my pace up as long as I could. After nearly an hour of running, my foot slipped on a slick rock, and I fell over through brush and trees. I could feel scrapes and scratches forming on my face, as well as bruises beginning to form on my body. I came to a rest in the mud and nearly fainted. My eyes shot open a moment later as I heard a rustling of bushes. I scrambled back up and continued moving down the mountain, now with more of a limp. After nearly 10 more minutes of limping down the mountain, I exited the trees, not too far from where I had parked my car. Seeing this gave me hope I had never felt before. As I approached, I began to feel my injuries more and more. I quickly got inside my car and safely drove home. I've been laying on this couch with ice packs ever since I got home. I gave my ex a phone call this morning, and I asked her if she still hiked up on that mountain. She told me that she did, and I told her exactly what I'm about to tell all of you right now. If you ever feel like going camping or hiking up a mountain alone, don't. There's something living up there in the mountains, in those woods, something terrifying, and it's something you don't ever want to see for yourself. I've been living in the Southwest for my entire life, and I'll be the first to tell you that there isn't much going on here, even though I assume that could be said for pretty much anywhere that isn't Disneyland. To be honest, there's only two guarantees living in the Southwest: the scorching heat and the rocks. I remember my mom taking me over to the Grand Canyon when I was little, and I couldn't help but think, this is it? I wasn't excited like your average kid, but my point was still valid. It was just rocky formations and the sun bearing down overhead. Once the initial feeling of viewing the canyon went away, I just couldn't wait to get back home. Growing up, I found comfort in my friendships. While the town and landscape offered little in the way of entertainment, the friends I had made over the years made up for it. We would spend our summers riding our bikes through the various side streets and circling all the blocks. We would just be outside convenience stores on hot days. The years slipped by so quick.
and before I knew it, I was sitting in a lecture hall, listening to the professor just rattle on. The college life wasn't what I had imagined. Growing up, I had heard all these stories from adults about the good times they had in college. It seemed to be far more work than play. All of my professors were demanding, and my off hours were filled with whatever part-time job I could find at the time. Lucky for me, it wasn't all that bad. One of my closest friends, Drew, had gone to the same college with me. We had most classes together, so that made it a little bit more exciting. Drew was one of the first people I had met growing up. He had moved to the neighborhood roughly a year before we began school together. We became fast friends, which could be perceived as quite strange from the outside. Drew was extremely outgoing, the type of person to always be the center of attention. Meanwhile, let's just say that I was less approachable. Looking back, I guess it's quite humorous to think about. He was very popular in school, but instead of hanging out with the plastic clique, as I called them, he would choose to hang around with me. Eventually, our group of friends grew over the years. Alan, Mikey, Logan, Nate, and Riley, and with Drew and me added into the mix, that made 7 of us. However, by the time we all graduated high school, only 3 of us lived in town. Drew and I both got accepted into the same college just outside of town, while Nate had gotten a pretty steady job working at a warehouse. Even though that seemed to take up all his time, the others moved out of town or out of the state. The end of college was quickly approaching, and during lunch one day, Drew mentioned to me that he had a job lined up for him out of state. As much as it hurt to hear, I understood and was happy for him. That of course forced me to think about my plans after college, and I quickly realized I didn't have many aspirations. I think Drew could tell by my expression that the news was somewhat heavy for me, but he assured me that everything would be fine. I ended up just returning a shrug. Before we returned to our classes, he mentioned that he was working on something that would make me much happier. My curiosity lit up as I wondered what he could mean by working on something. As the days and weeks passed, I had completely forgotten about this conversation. Until about a week after graduation, Drew messaged me and asked if I was available for an upcoming weekend. I checked my calendar, and I told him I was, but of course I inquired as to what it was about. He said he wanted to go camping. We had never gone camping before, and Drew didn't really strike me as the outdoors type. He pleaded with me that this would be really fun, and despite having a couple of reservations about it, I agreed. I made note of the weekend and marked it on my calendar. I bought what I imagined to be enough provisions for a day or two, and waited for Drew to pick me up. He arrived late in the morning on Friday, and I hopped into his car. He flashed a grin that seemed to hint like he was hiding something. I asked him what was up, but he just shook his head. We drove out of the town for a few miles before turning off onto a dirt road. The road began to go up the side of a rock formation, and we arrived at the peak of this hill. I noticed this large, flat clearing. These small mesas are not uncommon, but I was surprised that this was going to be our destination. As we rode to a stop, I noticed a few other cars in the vicinity. I immediately recognized the people standing next to them: Alan, Mikey, Riley, Logan, and Nate. 2 of them were busy setting up tents while another was busy getting the fire started. I chuckled and shook my head. Drew briefly patted me on the shoulder before we both hopped out. Everyone was in great spirits, and we spent most of the day remembering about the past. We got the campsite all set up, and I began soaking everything in around the edges of the hilltop. My feelings towards this rocky terrain was much different than when I was younger. As I stood there attempting to soak in my surroundings, I noticed something off in the distance. A large dark shape was moving slowly down the hill. I tried to focus my eyes by squinting, but it wasn't helping. Nate then patted me on the shoulder and asked me if I wanted a beer. Showing the still semi-full can in my hand towards him, he nodded and began to walk away when I called him back over. I asked him to check out this weird shape on the other hill.
and he stood there briefly scanning the terrain. He told me he couldn't see anything, and I began looking in the same area that I had last spotted it. Sure enough, the shape I had seen was gone. I shrugged, telling him it was most likely a wild animal or something. He gave me a weird look. I knew he was implying that I was drunk, but then he laughed and walked off. As I stood there, I couldn't stop thinking about that weird shape. In contrast to the terrain around it, it was quite large, and it seemed to crawl along the rocks. I had never seen an animal move like that before, so my brain was hyper-focused on whatever it was. I eventually pulled myself away from the cliff's edge and returned to the camp. We ate various foods we had brought along with us, and put a sizable dent into the alcoholic drinks we had brought. It wasn't long until we all retired to our tents for the night. At some point during the night, I was awoken to an odd sound. It sounded like someone was digging in the dirt outside of my tent. When I first heard this, my body initially seized up. There would be a long scrape in the dirt, followed by a stop, and then another long scrape. I thought maybe one of the guys couldn't sleep well and was just walking around outside, killing time. When I heard something new, something which sent a wave of uneasiness coursing through my veins, something was breathing next to my tent. It was inhaling sharply and allowed a very quiet laugh. The laughing is what creeped me out, only because it sounded very artificial, like it was almost mimicking a laugh. The scraping then resumed before fading off in the distance, and the sounds of nature once again filled the night air. I laid awake in my tent for a few hours before falling asleep. I then woke up to Drew patting me on the leg. I shot up in panic, nearly striking him in the process. He went backwards with his hands up, and I caught my breath and apologized to him. He then asked if I could come outside and take a look at something. I stepped out from my tent and saw everyone standing around looking at the ground. I turned and saw large scrapes in the dirt around my tent before they trailed off towards the cliff. I could feel that familiar panic rising in my chest when suddenly I heard that fake laughing again, which nearly caused me to jump out of my skin. I spun around and saw Nate with a wide smile on his face. Then, all at the same time, everyone around erupted in laughing. My fear quickly turned to madness, then subsided and was replaced with acceptance. Mikey then appeared from behind my tent with a towel in his hand as he wiped the tears away from his eyes. After the laughing died down, Nate apologized and said he couldn't help himself. I nodded to him and accepted the joke. Honestly, it was a pretty good one. We all got back to hanging out and enjoying the day. As we sat around in our chairs, talking, the conversation circled back to the prank, and Nate asked what I thought was on the other hill. I attempted to brush them off, but they insisted. I described to them the shape, and they all tried to take a guess on what it was. Some of the ideas thrown around were coyotes or jaguars, and Mikey suggested it was most likely just a really big snake, to which we all started laughing. Later in the evening, after we all had a bite to eat, we were just about to bed down for the night when a piercing scream drew our attention. We all turned and saw Riley running towards us from the edge of the cliff in a state of panic. He managed to say he saw something over the edge of the cliff. His wide eyes darted to each of us, looking for acceptance when everyone, including myself, busted out laughing. Half of the group turned to me chuckling, and I told Riley that it was a good attempt, but it wouldn't work a second time. He then walked over to me and grabbed me by the shirt collar. He shouted at me that he wasn't joking, and I threw my hands up, attempting to push him off, when he suddenly released me. I brushed my shirt down, asking him what his problem was. When I looked back up at him, I noticed that he was no longer looking at me, but instead was looking at something past me. Everyone else became silent as they all stared in my direction as well. Slowly, I turned and saw what everyone else was looking at. There was a face, just on the edge of the campfire light. It looked almost like a porcelain doll. I couldn't make out the rest of its body. I took a step backward and looked out of the corner of my eye, just to make sure everyone in our group was here, and that this wasn't just another prank. Everyone was right beside me, and I noticed that Nate looked more shaken than the rest of us. I turned back and saw a single hand appear into the light as it got closer to us. The arm was thin, but was nearly the size of its body. Its hand was pressing deeply into the dirt, with these fingers that came to a fine point. The fingers didn't appear rigid. They almost reminded me of the Grinch's fingers, which for some reason made me shudder. Even worse, another hand appeared, and it looked as if it was pulling its body behind it. As more and more of it came into the light, I watched this long, almost insect-like body. I did take note of something right away. As I was watching this happen, I couldn't hear a single sound from this creature. No shuffling of dirt, no fake laughing sounds. It was silent. Then I felt something touch my shoulder, trying desperately not to scream. I looked and it was Drew. He whispered in a shaky voice that he wanted to run to the cars. I was only able to return a slight nod. Drew and I were just about to make a run for it, when Logan, someone who is always quiet, screamed and began sprinting away. The creature's head then snapped to face him, and still without a sound, it darted back into the darkness, and all we saw was a large shadow blur heading towards his direction. Logan's screams were cut off, and I watched the streak of red shoot out towards us from the darkness. Droplets of blood impacted the campfire. A second later, Logan came flying into the light and hit the ground hard. He was gripping his leg, which had these massive cuts carved into it. We all scrambled to pick him up, and we dashed towards our vehicles. We threw him in the back and drove down the hill back towards town, and we didn't stop until we were at the hospital. We quickly carried him inside as the nurses and doctors took over from there. Drew and I looked down at our blood-stained hands and walked over to sit with the others. Drew was the only one of us who could somehow speak clearly, and he told the doctor that Logan had slipped off the edge of where we were camping, and that we were able to pull him back up, but he messed up his leg on some sharp rocks in the process. We were in the waiting room for a few hours until the doctor arrived and told us that he was going to be fine. He said his leg looked much worse than it actually was, which we all exhaled a sigh of relief. Just before the doctor departed, he turned and asked us again to confirm that the cause of this were rocks, and we all shakily nodded our heads at him. We thought he was going to press further, but he just nodded to his clipboard, returned a faint smile, and made a passing remark about him being lucky it was just his leg and not his head. Logan was released from the hospital after 5 days, and we all showed up to see him off home. He barely said 2 words to us the entire time. After that, one by one, everyone else went back to living their life, not even wanting to talk about that night. And just as Drew was getting his things in order, I asked him if his company was hiring. He stopped and flashed a faint, creepy smile, which upon seeing my expression, quickly shifted into a look of concern before telling me yes, they are.